Hello everyone, and welcome to this pre-recorded video looking at the contracts for different scheme in the UK. Today we'll be looking at the latest round of auction results, as well as how they've compared to different years, and what effect this might have on the UK PPA market. The session will be run by myself, Freddie Lyons. I head up the energy markets team within Zygo department of Schneider Electric. So the agenda for today will be an introduction to the CFD scheme at a high level, how it works and how the pricing scheme works. We'll then look at the latest auction results that have come out in July this year. We'll see what effect this might potentially have on the UK PPA market. And then finally look at a bit of analysis that we've done internally, analysing how auction capacities might stack up against wind and solar targets in European countries, and how that might affect the PPA potential. So just diving into an introduction to the CFD scheme in the UK. What is it? Well, it is a government subsidy tool used to help promote and advance the development of renewable energy capacity nationally. It is a competitive auction that's been running in the UK since 2015. It's been running every 2 years, although I think as of February, at the beginning of this year, it's going to be happening annually instead. So how does it work? Well, these renewable energy developers will bid their power projects with a proposed strike price and a proposed volume. The lowest bids will be accepted first within their technology, until the maximum budget set out by the government before has been reached. The budget for this round of auctions was £265 million, which was massively more than the last round of auction, which was just £60 million. So it's a massive increase seen in the last few years being invested by the government into this CFD scheme. So why was it introduced, and why is this scheme still running? Well, it was introduced to promote investment into renewable and low carbon technologies. And although the development which has been substantial, so much so that renewable assets now have become cheaper than building fossil fuel equivalents, much like PPA does, it helps provide investors with certainty and clarity around their investments, providing a sort of fixed price period during volatile electricity market periods, and it helps reduce the impact of that fluctuations, those troughs and those peaks on the financials of the project. Now looking at just a bit more around that pricing mechanism and how the scheme works. Well, the strike price that I mentioned in the last slide, which is agreed between the developer and the government entity, basically represents the actual amount the developer gets paid per megawatt hour of production. Whenever the market price is above this strike price, the generator pays the difference back. And whenever the market price is below the strike price, the government will pay back towards the developer to meet that strike price. And this will really help reduce the sort of high fluctuations, the outgoings and ingoings and financials of the project, to reduce it during massive periods of volatile pricing that we've seen, especially over the last 6 months, but really over the last year in general, and we can't rule out might happen again over the next 10 years as well. This scheme is probably the most common mechanism used in auction schemes across Europe, although there are a number of countries looking to try different approaches. I think Germany, for one, is trialling a new negative auction approach starting next year. And as I mentioned before, yeah, these were occurring every 2 years, but from now on, in 2023, they'll be occurring annually in the UK. So to look at the latest rounds, which happened in July, the 4th round of CFD and the results that have come out of that. Well, I'm sure some of you might have seen it in the news already that this was record-breaking rounds. It broke all previous records in terms of capacity and price. And 11 gigawatts of capacity was awarded. which is absolutely staggering. It's enough to power 12 million British homes. Some really, really large numbers there, and really eclipses the previous record of, I think, which was 6 gigawatts at the last round, which almost doubles that. It is the first time that tidal power and floating wind have been included within this CFD round, so some new technologies coming in there as well. And also, really importantly, solar PV and onshore wind have been reintroduced back into the auction for the first time since 2015. So great to see those back and some new technologies in there. And finally, just looking at the chart on the right, breaking down the round 4 capacity results by technology. So that 11 gigawatt of capacity, most of which you can see has been awarded for offshore wind. Mainly for fairly large projects, some of which up to a gigawatt or a couple of gigawatts in some circumstances in size. Then next was solar PV projects, around 2.2 gigawatts. This was allocated for around 65 projects, obviously of much smaller capacity, but all of which over 5 megawatts. Next was the onshore wind results. I believe there were 10 projects which were allocated that gigawatt of capacity, all of which again over 5 megawatts in size. And finally, on the right there, there's the sort of other technologies like the tidal and floating offshore wind, which make up the rest. This is a much smaller, less significant volume. And that's partly because these are much newer technologies. They're much more expensive to run and have higher levelized costs of electricity, meaning that the capacity awarded for them is going to be much less substantial in comparison to the well-developed solar and wind technologies. So now looking at just some of the highlights we've seen in terms of pricing from the latest rounds. The chart on the left shows the difference by technology, and highlighted in blue is actually offshore wind became the cheapest technology from the latest round at around £46 per megawatt hour, making it about 4 times cheaper than the current cost of gas in the UK. So some seriously staggeringly low numbers in comparison to fossil equivalents there. It was also the first time that offshore wind was cheaper than solar PV and onshore wind, albeit that solar and onshore wind haven't been included since 2015, but just goes to show the significant learning rates seen in the offshore wind sector. Solar and onshore wind still very cost competitive. They're both of them around that £50 per megawatt hour. Then the newer technologies, as mentioned, are going to be much more expensive. So the tidal and floating offshore wind, much higher, much more nascent technologies need to be proven first, hence why fewer capacity was allocated to those as well. Just to break down the sort of evolution of that price, taking out offshore wind in that chart on the right, which has been ever present in the CFD scheme since the first one in 2015. You can see the significant learning rates and the significant drop in the strike price throughout the auctions across the years. Going from around 120 down to that 46 pounds we saw earlier this month. It'd be really interesting to see actually how this develops and where this goes. Especially with auctions being annually henceforth out towards 2030, and with the effects of global inflation massively increasing the prices of commodities, increasing shipping costs, increasing EPC costs, and the final build of that project. Is that going to have an effect on the potential strike price going forward? Is it going to increase, or could it potentially stay the same? So something interesting to look out for in future rounds. So what does this mean? Record volumes and record low prices for the UK PPA market. Well, there's no doubt that it will have an impact and reduce the number of renewable projects available for corporate off-takers. As I mentioned, 60 or so solar projects and 10 onshore wind projects being allocated to this CFD round. Also meaning that some projects might be pulled partway through this tender process and potential future CFD processes. And this really does highlight the need for acting fast and moving quickly throughout the tender process to ensure that the price you've negotiated is locked in, but also more importantly, so that that project that you've been working hard to contract on is still available and doesn't get lost to another route to market like a CFD. On the other hand, most of the capacity within this auction round is for offshore wind projects, around 7 gigawatts. These are typically very large, big, massive gigawatt projects, and those will affect companies with the highest consumption, the tech giants, your Microsofts, your Amazons, who are looking to secure massive PPA deals. It won't affect the majority of the market who are looking at sort of slightly smaller scaled PPA projects. Also, the strike price for the auction is well below that of the corporate PPA offer prices. And this is purely because of the risk involved. These developers weigh up the fact that of locking in a 15-year CFD contract with a government entity provides less risk for the investors, and therefore can afford to lock in a lower price. Whereas when they go with a corporate off-taker, they bake in that risk into the PPA offer price to ensure they have their backs covered throughout that 15-year or 20-year tenure, however long it may be. And this does mean that some developers will still have the appetite for a PPA. Those who have experience in the market and those who have already tested it and realize how to do it will have appetite to do it. Purely because of that price premium that's available with locking in a contract with a corporate rather than with the government. And finally, and probably most importantly, I would say that even with this, massive amounts of capacity, the latest auction rounds, there is still significant capacity available to meet renewable targets set by the UK and other European countries. And I'll delve a little bit into that now. So if you look at this chart on the left, it's ordered by sort of decreasing from left to right wind and solar targets set by the national governments across Europe. You can see on the left there, Germany with a massive, just under 300 gigawatts of capacity targeted wind and solar by 2030. The UK around 120 gigawatts, again, really massive numbers, and so on and so on. And underneath this line, we've come up with analysis as to how we think this wind and solar target could be met. And obviously at the bottom, you've got the in blue, the existing capacity that is already there within the countries, which will account towards the target. Above that, in grey, we have the potential auction capacity. So this has been forecasted and analysed based upon historical auction capacity values. The values we've been seeing coming out of 2022 auctions, the frequency at which these auctions might be happening across different countries, have all come together to create a sort of an idea and forecasted capacity of how much renewable capacity could be taken via CFDs or other mechanisms out towards 2030. And then this leaves a sort of a rest of sort of availability, which we've highlighted in dark green and called the sort of PPA potential, the amount at which corporates could engage with developers and lock in long-term contracts, which is needed considerably in order for the countries to meet wind and solar targets. And this, across Europe, highlighted in green, is still going to be massive. It's going to be over sort of 250 gigawatts across, select countries. And in the UK specifically, even with the annual auctions out to 2030, this value comes at around 30 gigawatts of capacity available. So still massive, massive amounts. And it should be noted that this green value might be a bit of a conservative estimate. That existing capacity will also include some projects which will likely be decommissioned in coming years. especially in countries like Germany and the UK, there's a number of old onshore wind projects which will be coming to the end of their life cycle, and this will add even more potential, available capacity for corporates to lock in with PPAs with renewable energy developers. You also might be thinking, like, some of those countries on the right, does this mean that they don't have much PPA potential at all? But actually, this chart and this sort of wind and solar target doesn't include countries like Sweden, Finland, and even Belgium, who have a really large project pipeline, so large that it's exceeding their wind and solar target for 2030 already. They keep expanding their target, and the renewable energy developers keep building more projects. So this target could probably be seen as a bit of a minimum, definitely not as a cap. The PPA potential can way expand beyond the wind and solar targets set by the government for their 2030 targets. And finally, the auction capacity will also include, the offshore wind that I've already mentioned, but also biomass, tidal, and other low carbon technologies within that capacity amount. So, especially the biomass and tidal, they're not usually considered for PPA contracts with corporates. Not only that, but obviously won't contribute towards that wind and solar target that we've set out in this chart here. So if there's significant allocation towards other low carbon technologies within these auctions, then again that will add even more PPA potential capacity going forward out towards 2030. Finally, just some takeaways and some conclusions from the analysis we've done is that yes, of course, this was a record-breaking auction round, the largest we've seen and the cheapest we've seen ever. With greater capacity than the 3 previous rounds put together. Some seriously large numbers, which is encouraging to see that the government is, building and encouraging a, safe and economic investment environment for renewable energy developers and investors to build out our low carbon technologies. On the availability side, there will be fewer projects potentially over the coming months and over future CFD auction rounds. So act fast through your PPA process. If you want to lock in that price, if you found the right project for you, act fast to lock in that project before potentially another route to market comes up. Pricing. The strike prices observed are, again, some of the lowest we've seen across all auctions since 2015 and are well below the PPA prices. So developers will still be eager to engage with those corporates, especially those who have PPA experience, in order to lock in that potential price premium on their project rather than engaging with the government CFD subsidy scheme. And finally, as just gone through from that previous slide, there is still ample availability for corporates to lock in contracts with renewable energy developers, despite that 11 gigawatts of capacity. If we are to meet our 2030 targets, then there still needs to be a lot more work in terms of investment and building out our renewable energy capacity. And who knows, in the last sort of 2 or 3 months or so, a number of countries across Europe have been increasing and doubling their wind and solar targets going forward. So really the sky is the limit for the amount of renewable energy capacity in the UK and across Europe, and the amount of PPA and corporate activity there will be needed to engage in those projects as well. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions from me, then contact me at freddie.lyons@se.com. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful day and look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.